Nova Vance's eyes flickered open, and she immediately regretted it. The bright, sterile lights above her felt like they were burning her retinas. She blinked, trying to focus, but her head was pounding, a dull ache pulsing through her skull. Everything was blurry, disorienting. She tried to lift her hand to rub her face, but her arms felt strangely heavy. Panic rose in her chest. Where was she? What happened? The last thing Nova remembered was sitting in her apartment, curled up on the couch with a book, her coffee growing cold beside her. But now, she was lying on a cold, metallic surface, her body strapped down by smooth, tight restraints. The air smelled sterile, almost like bleach, sharp and unnatural. Her heart began to race as she tried to sit up, but the restraints didn't budge. She strained against them, her breath shallow and quick. Her mind was a blur, but one thought kept pressing at the back of her skull. This wasn't home. Nova's head snapped to the side. Through the haze of her vision, she could see walls made of smooth, silver material she couldn't recognize. The floor beneath her was metallic, and everything felt wrong. She felt exposed, vulnerable. Panic rose again as she realized she wasn't alone. Around her, several alien creatures stood, their forms odd and unsettling. They were tall, easily over 7 feet, with smooth, iridescent skin that shimmered in hues of deep purple and blue. Their eyes were large and black, with no visible pupils, and they seemed to pierce right through her. Their features were sharp, angular, almost insect-like. There was no doubt in Nova's mind. They weren't human. Her chest tightened, and she tried to call out, but no sound came from her throat. The largest of the creatures, standing at the forefront of the group, stepped forward. He was imposing, with broad shoulders covered in scaly armor-like skin that shifted colors as he moved. His face had an almost reptilian quality, with a wide, flat nose and a mouth that split into sharp, jagged teeth. His eyes glowed faintly, and his voice, a deep, rumbling growl, echoed through the room as he spoke. "Specimen X is awake," he said, his tone calm but heavy with authority. Nova's heart skipped a beat. Specimen X. What did that mean? She opened her mouth to speak, but the words stuck in her throat. She felt something cold against her skin, like a needle or a probe, pressing into her neck. It was then that she realized she was not in any normal kind of room. This wasn't a hospital, a lab, or even a secure facility. It was something far stranger. She didn't belong here. The alien who appeared to be in charge turned his gaze toward the others, gesturing with a long, clawed hand. A smaller alien, its features less intimidating but still strange, approached Nova with a glowing device. The light from the device flickered, scanning her body as the alien muttered under its breath in a language Nova couldn't understand. Nova felt her pulse quicken. They were studying her. She didn't know why, but the sense of dread grew with each passing second. The restraints around her arms were tight, but she could feel the soft hum of some sort of energy field running through them. There was no escaping this place. Not yet. Subject appears to be in stable condition. The small alien spoke in a high-pitched voice, turning to the leader. "We can proceed with the next phase." Nova's head swam. Next phase. What were they talking about? What did they want from her? "Proceed," the leader, Drakthar, commanded. His voice held an edge of impatience now, as if he'd grown tired of waiting. Nova's thoughts were a storm. Her body was trembling with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. She had to get out of here. She had to understand what was happening. Who were these creatures? What did they want with her? As the aliens moved closer, the cold fear settled into the pit of her stomach. This was no dream, no nightmare. This was real. And if she didn't figure out how to escape soon, she might never see the Earth she once knew again. Nova's mind raced as the alien creatures circled her, their eyes studying her like some kind of specimen on display. Drakthar, the towering alien in charge, stepped closer, his dark, shimmering scales glinting under the bright lights of the lab. He towered over her, his massive frame casting a shadow that felt like it could swallow her whole. His eyes glowed faintly, and his mouth, filled with sharp teeth, curled into a slight grin, as if he were amused by her confusion. "Specimen X, you will come to understand your purpose here," Drakthar said in his deep, rumbling voice. His words sent a chill through Nova. He wasn't asking her to cooperate. He was telling her what was going to happen next. Nova struggled against the restraints again, her body reacting with a surge of panic. Her mind screamed for freedom, but she knew she was no match for the strength of the aliens. A smaller, more slender alien stepped forward, its long, flexible limbs moving gracefully. Its skin was pale green, with faint lines running across its body, like veins glowing with an eerie light. It seemed much younger than Drakthar, its eyes wide and curious, but its expression held no kindness. It spoke in a high-pitched, rapid voice, the words unfamiliar to Nova. "Drakthar, it will not be long before the subject begins to show signs of the genetic changes," the alien said, its voice almost musical. Nova was confused by its words, but felt the tension in the room rise. The language sounded alien, its words harsh and jarring, but there was something oddly familiar about the way the alien said genetic changes. What did they mean by that? Drakthar nodded, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "Yes, we will accelerate the process. The human genome has proven to be more adaptable than we expected." He turned his gaze back to Nova, his sharp eyes locking with hers. "Your kind, Specimen X, holds the key to unlocking the power we need to dominate this galaxy." Nova's stomach lurched. Power? Dominate? She couldn't fully understand what they meant, but the implication was enough to make her heart pound with dread. She tried to push the fear away, to focus on anything but the sinking feeling that grew in her chest. These aliens, these Zhirkov, had plans for her, and it wasn't to simply study her. "Accelerate the procedure," Drakthar ordered. The slender alien nodded and stepped closer, producing a strange device from a compartment on its arm. It clicked and whirred as the alien pressed it to Nova's arm, injecting something that felt cold, like liquid ice, into her veins. A jolt of discomfort shot through her, and Nova gasped in pain, her whole body shaking from the sensation. "What are you doing?" Nova managed to croak, her voice hoarse. She felt the words catch in her throat. She had to ask, to understand what was happening to her. She wasn't just here for some kind of experiment. She was being turned into something, someone else. The younger alien, Ravka, as Nova learned later, glanced at Drakthar nervously before speaking in a quieter tone, almost apologetically. "It is necessary," he said, though his voice was filled with doubt. "We need your genes to evolve faster. We have discovered something in your biology that we did not expect. Something powerful." Nova's mind spun. Powerful. Was this about her genetic code? What did they mean by evolve faster? And what did they want with her to begin with? Before she could process further, Drakthar interrupted, his voice sharp and commanding. "Enough talking. Specimen X needs to be prepared." He looked down at Nova with cold, calculating eyes. "You are more than human now. Your biology is changing. Faster than we anticipated." Nova's blood ran cold. Changing. Was it too late to stop whatever they were doing to her? She could feel something inside her, a strange energy building in her cells. It felt like fire rushing through her veins, a power she had never experienced. It was exhilarating and terrifying at the same time. "We are on the brink of something extraordinary," Drakthar continued, his voice low with excitement. "Your transformation is not just for our benefit. It will bring us victory. We will finally crush our enemies and rule this galaxy. And you, Specimen X, will be the key to unlocking that power." Nova's heart raced. She wasn't just a test subject or a prisoner. She was a weapon. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. If they succeeded in their plans, she wouldn't just lose her freedom. She could become an instrument of destruction. Desperation clawed at her, but there was no way out. Not yet. She was trapped, her fate uncertain. But one thing was clear: if she was going to survive this, she had to find a way to stop them before they could use her. As the days passed, Nova's mind struggled to grasp the full scale of what the Zhirkov had planned for her. The strange cold injections they had given her kept coming, and each time, it felt like her body was being torn apart and rebuilt from the inside out. Her muscles ached, her skin tingled with strange energy, and her mind felt as if it were expanding in ways she couldn't understand. She knew her body was changing, but the power inside her was both terrifying and fascinating. She could feel it, pulsing through her veins, making her stronger, faster, sharper. Drakthar's words echoed in her mind. "You are more than human now." She had no idea what that meant or how it would play out, but she knew one thing for sure: these aliens weren't studying her just to learn. They were using her, shaping her into something for their own gain. What terrified her even more was how little control she had over it. Every time she thought she could push back, her body betrayed her. The changes were happening too quickly. She was lying on a metal table, her restraints temporarily loosened while the Zhirkov scientists ran their tests. One of them, Ravka, the younger, more hesitant scientist, was working on a data panel beside her. He was fiddling with controls, his long, pale green fingers tapping the surface with precision. He didn't look up at her, but Nova caught his eye as he glanced over his shoulder. There was something soft about his gaze, almost apologetic, but it was impossible to tell if that meant he was truly sympathetic or if he just pitied her. "What are you doing to me?" Nova asked, her voice shaky but firm. The words tasted like acid in her mouth, but she had to know. She couldn't keep pretending she didn't feel what was happening to her. Ravka hesitated, glancing nervously at Drakthar, who was standing in the corner, watching silently. "We are accelerating your genetic evolution," he said quietly, avoiding her gaze. "Your body, it's adapting to changes that we've never seen before. It's faster than we expected." Nova frowned. "What changes? Why me?" Ravka bit his lip. "Your DNA. It's unlike anything we've encountered in the entire galaxy," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "There's something in your genetics that holds incredible power. We thought we could use it to help us win the war, but you're more than just a weapon. Your abilities are growing faster than we can control." Nova's stomach tightened at his words. She was a weapon. She had known it in her gut, but hearing him admit it out loud made it all the more real. She had become something they could use, manipulate, and control. "Why didn't you tell me this sooner?" she demanded, her voice rising in anger. "You've been injecting me with something that's turning me into, what? A freak." Ravka flinched but didn't back down. "I didn't want to tell you. I thought it would be better if you didn't know the truth. But now..." He stopped himself, his eyes flashing toward Drakthar once again, a silent warning passing between them. Drakthar, sensing the shift in the air, stepped forward. His deep voice was calm, but there was a coldness to it. "The human genome is capable of things we could never have imagined. Your species has the potential to evolve rapidly under the right conditions, but we need your power to tip the scales in our favor." His gaze softened, but there was no warmth in it. "You will help us win this war, Nova. You will help us change the fate of the galaxy." Nova's pulse quickened. Change the fate of the galaxy. She could barely understand what he meant. Was this about control, or was she something more? Whatever was happening to her was too fast, too overwhelming. They would use her to crush the very people she loved. Her anger boiled over. She wasn't going to be their weapon. She wasn't going to let them shape her into something they could control. But as her fists clenched, she felt it again, the power. A strange energy surged within her, an unfamiliar force that seemed to grow with every passing second. It pulsed inside her chest, sending ripples of heat through her limbs. Before she could think about it any further, the power exploded outward in a wave of energy, causing the lights in the lab to flicker and hum. The Zhirkov scientists froze, their eyes wide with surprise and fear. Nova felt her body buzzing with strength, her muscles brimming with power she didn't know how to harness. Ravka took a cautious step back, his eyes wide with alarm. "This wasn't supposed to happen so soon," he whispered. Nova's heart raced. She couldn't stop the changes, but now she knew she could control them. Somehow. The question was, how far would they push her before she lost herself completely? Would she remain Nova, or would the power inside her consume her like it had the Zherkov? She didn't know the answer, but she did know one thing. She wasn't going to let them win. Not without a fight. The air in the lab crackled with tension after Nova's sudden outburst of power. Her heart raced as she stood there, breathing heavily, her body still buzzing with the strange energy that now flowed through her veins. She could feel the power pulsing beneath her skin, like a force she couldn't control. But that didn't stop it from being real. It was terrifying, but also exhilarating. The Zherkov scientists, who had once seemed so sure of their control over her, now looked uncertain. Their eyes flickered nervously, and Nova could sense the change in the air. They were afraid. Ravka was the first to speak, his voice trembling with a mixture of awe and fear. "This wasn't part of the plan," he muttered, his green skin turning paler under the pressure. You should have remained stable." Drakthar, who had been standing in the corner washing with a cold, calculating gaze, now stepped forward, his tall, imposing figure casting a long shadow across the room. He glared at Nova, but there was a flicker of something else in his eyes, something like wariness. "Control yourself, Specimen X," he commanded, his deep voice betraying no emotion, though Nova could sense his growing frustration. "You are not ready for this kind of power." Nova's fists clenched at her sides. She was done being a prisoner here, done being their experiment. The thought of what they wanted to do to her, what they had already done to her, made her stomach twist with disgust. She wasn't just some object to be manipulated. She was human, and no matter how much power was inside her now, she wasn't going to lose herself to these aliens. She had to get out of here. As she looked around the sterile lab, a flicker of a plan began to form in her mind. The Zherkov may have been powerful, but she was starting to realize that she wasn't as helpless as they thought. Her body was changing, yes, but her mind was still her own. She still had a chance to break free. Nova wasn't going to stay here and let them turn her into a weapon. She was going to fight back. Ravka was still watching her nervously, his eyes darting between Drakthar and Nova. The leader of the Zherkov seemed more focused on keeping control over her than anything else, and Nova noticed the way he kept glancing at the monitors and the control panels around the room. There were cameras, security systems. There had to be a way out. She just needed to buy herself some time. "Control myself," Nova repeated, her voice calm but icy. She stared directly at Drakthar, her gaze hardening with defiance. "You've been experimenting on me for days, and now you think you can control this." She gestured to the strange energy thrumming within her, trying to keep her fear in check. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." Drakthar narrowed his eyes at her, but Nova could see the shift in his expression. He wasn't sure if she was a threat anymore. He wasn't sure of anything. And that uncertainty gave Nova an opening. She had to act fast. Without warning, she pushed herself off the table, her body moving more quickly than she had ever experienced before. The Zherkov scientists were momentarily stunned, and she seized the opportunity. She grabbed the nearest piece of equipment, a long metallic rod from the corner of the room, and swung it toward the control panel that Ravka had been working on. The rod slammed into the console, sending sparks flying. The lights in the lab flickered, and the hum of the machinery slowed, throwing the room into chaos. Ravka yelped, taking a few cautious steps back. What are you doing?" "I'm getting out of here," Nova snapped, already moving toward the door. Her heart was pounding, and she could feel the power inside her surging again, stronger than before. There was no going back now. This was her chance. Drakthar roared in frustration, his voice thundering through the lab. "Stop her," he ordered. The other Zherkoth rushed toward her, their long limbs moving with a terrifying speed. But Nova was faster now, her body responding instinctively to the energy within her. She darted toward the exit, her mind racing. There had to be a way out. There had to be a weakness in their defenses. As she reached the door, she saw something unexpected. Ravka was standing there, his eyes filled with uncertainty, but there was something else in his expression, a hint of empathy. He wasn't blocking her escape. He was hesitating. For a moment, their eyes locked, and Nova could see the conflict in his face. He didn't want to be part of this. She could feel it. "Why are you helping me?" she demanded, still on edge. "What do you want from me?" Ravka didn't answer immediately. He just looked at her, his pale skin almost glowing under the harsh lights of the lab. Then, finally, he spoke in a quiet, strained voice. "I don't want this. You don't deserve to be used like this. If you leave now, there's no going back for any of us." Nova didn't have time to process his words. Nova's heart hammered in her chest as she sprinted down the narrow, metallic corridors of the alien ship. The lights overhead flickered and buzzed, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch after her, but she didn't dare look back. Her mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, and every step she took seemed to echo in the silence, making it feel as though the entire ship was alive, watching her, hunting her. She didn't know where the hallway led, but it didn't matter. Anywhere was better than that cold, sterile lab where they had been turning her into something she didn't recognize. Her body was still thrumming with power. She could feel the energy inside her, almost like a living thing, waiting to burst out again. The last surge had been instinctive, a reaction to her desperate need to escape. But what if it was more than that? What if this was who she was now? The thought made her stomach churn. She didn't want to be a weapon, but the power was growing, like fire inside her. She had no idea how to control it, and that terrified her. As she rounded a corner, she collided with something solid, sending a shockwave of pain through her shoulder. She stumbled back, barely catching herself, and looked up to find a figure standing before her. It was a tall, alien form, wearing a dark, sleek uniform. Nova's breath hitched. This was one of the Zherkoth soldiers, the ones Drakthar had sent to stop her. She didn't have time to think. Before she could react, the soldier reached for her, his fingers long and sharp. But something within her snapped. She felt the power rise within her once again, this time fully conscious of it. With a snarl, Nova swung her arm out, her hand glowing with a strange, radiant energy. The soldier's eyes widened in surprise as the wave of power hit him square in the chest. He was thrown back against the wall with a crash, his body crumpling to the floor in a heap. Nova's breath came in sharp gasps. She had done it. She had used the power consciously, and it worked. She stared at the fallen soldier, her heart still racing. But there was no time to dwell on it. She couldn't stop now. She continued running, each step feeling like a battle against her own growing power. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, too fast to grasp. What was happening to her? How much longer would she be able to keep control of herself? She didn't know. All she knew was that she had to get out. She had to find a way to survive this. Turning another corner, she found herself in a vast chamber, much larger than the hallways she had been running through. The walls were lined with strange, glowing panels, and in the center of the room was a massive console, surrounded by a group of Zherkoth soldiers. They were busy with their own tasks, but as Nova stepped into the room, they immediately turned toward her, their eyes narrowing in recognition. "Specimen X," one of the soldiers growled, his voice low and dangerous. "You're not going anywhere." Nova felt her muscles tense as they began to close in on her. She didn't have time to think. She had to act now. The power within her surged again, and this time, it was more focused, more controlled. She raised her hands, and with a cry of effort, she unleashed a wave of energy. It rippled out from her, knocking the soldiers back with a force that made the entire room shake. For a moment, there was silence. Then the soldiers recovered, slowly rising to their feet, their eyes filled with fury. But Nova wasn't going to let them stop her. She darted toward the console, hoping it was some sort of control center. She had no idea how to operate it, but maybe, just maybe, it could help her escape. Her fingers hovered over the buttons, searching for something, anything, that would get her out of here. Just as she was about to press one of the glowing panels, a voice rang out behind her. "You're wasting your time. Specimen X." It was Drakthar. He had appeared in the doorway, his towering form blocking the only exit. His eyes gleamed with cold authority as he looked at her. "You can't escape. You are ours now. Your power is mine to control." Nova's chest tightened. She was cornered. The soldiers were still recovering, but they were closing in, and Drakthar was right there, a wall of strength and menace. But there was something else in his voice, a note of desperation. He wasn't just angry. He was afraid of what she could do. For the first time, Nova realized that this wasn't just about her escaping. It was about him losing control. She wasn't going to be their weapon. She wasn't going to be anyone's puppet. With a defiant yell, she sent another burst of energy toward Drakthar, forcing him to step back. The soldiers flinched, but they didn't dare move forward. Nova's eyes burned with determination. She wasn't going to stop now. Not until she was free. She slammed her hand down on the console, and with a sudden jarring hum, the room's doors slid open, revealing a dark corridor beyond. Nova didn't look back as she sprinted through the dark, winding corridors of the Zhirkov ship. The hum of machinery filled the air, and every now and then a light flickered above her, casting strange, distorted shadows. The taste of fear and determination mixed in her mouth. She was free, but not safe. Not yet. The soldiers would be after her, and Drakthar. He wouldn't stop until he had her back under his control. She needed to find a way off this ship, and fast. But first, she had to figure out what was really going on here. She had been injected with something, transformed in ways she couldn't fully understand. But one thing was certain. The Zhirkov wanted her for more than just her strength. They wanted to harness whatever power had awoken within her. And if she didn't stop them, she could become the weapon that would help them conquer the galaxy. That wasn't going to happen. Nova rounded another corner, her breath coming in short bursts, when suddenly she heard a sound that made her freeze. Footsteps. They were coming from further down the corridor. It wasn't the heavy, mechanized steps of Zhirkov soldiers, but something else, lighter, quicker, and for a moment, there was a strange, almost human-like quality to them. Nova pressed herself against the wall, trying to quiet her breathing. She didn't know if the footsteps were enemies or something else entirely, but she couldn't risk being caught again. Her eyes scanned the corridor, looking for a place to hide. She spotted a small doorway to her left, barely noticeable, tucked in the shadows. Without a second thought, she darted toward it and slipped inside, her heart pounding in her chest. Inside the room, she was greeted by a strange sight. It wasn't like the rest of the ship. This room looked lived in, almost warm, in an unsettling way. There were small, dim lights scattered across the space, casting a soft glow on the walls. The room was filled with odd equipment, but there were no signs of the Zhirkov's cold, clinical presence. Instead, there were maps pinned to the walls and strange symbols written on pieces of paper scattered across tables. It was almost like a hidden command center. Nova barely had time to take in the room before the footsteps stopped, and the door to the room opened slowly. Her pulse quickened, and she tensed, ready to fight. But when the figure stepped inside, she froze. It was a woman, human by the looks of her. She had short, dark hair, and sharp eyes that seemed to assess Nova in an instant. She wore a mix of makeshift armor and worn clothing, clearly not from the Zhirkov's side. Her posture was relaxed, but there was a sharpness to her that spoke of experience. "Who are you?" Nova demanded, her voice tight with suspicion. She couldn't afford to trust anyone, not after everything she had been through. The woman raised an eyebrow, but didn't move toward her. I'm not here to fight you, she said calmly. If anything, you're the one I've been waiting for. Nova's brow furrowed. Waiting for me? Who are you? My name is Kaya, the woman replied, her eyes scanning the corridor behind her cautiously. And I'm with the Resistance. The Resistance? Nova echoed, confused. What Resistance? Kaya took a step closer, her eyes locking with Nova's. The Zherkoth have been invading our worlds for years. We've been fighting back, trying to hold on to what's left of our people. But they're stronger, smarter, and they have control over technologies we can barely understand. You're part of something bigger, Nova. You've been changed for a reason. Your DNA, your abilities. They're the key to winning this war. Nova shook her head, her mind reeling. I don't understand. How is that possible? What do you mean, changed? Kaya sighed, her face serious. I've been studying the Zherkoth for years. Their experiments on humans. They've been trying to unlock something in your species for a long time. They thought they could turn you into a weapon to crush the rest of us. But what they didn't know is that humans have the... You, Nova, are living proof of that. Nova felt a strange mix of anger and confusion rise inside her. So I'm a test subject to them, she asked, her voice thick with bitterness. I'm just a tool in their war. Kaya shook her head firmly. You're not just a test subject. You're the future. You have powers they can't even comprehend. And if we can harness them, we can finally push the Zherkoth back and end this war once and for all. Nova's mind swirled with the possibilities. She had been so focused on escaping, on surviving, that she hadn't thought about the bigger picture. Could she really be the key to ending the war? Could she trust Kaya and the Resistance? Everything inside her screamed for answers, for a way out of this nightmare. But she knew she couldn't do it alone. How do we stop them? Nova asked, her voice steady now, the first spark of hope flickering in her chest. The weight of Kaya's words hung heavily in the air as Nova processed everything. A part of her had hoped for a way out, a way to escape the Zherkoth and their cruel experiments. But this, the Resistance, this was something else entirely. The realization that she might be humanity's last hope was both terrifying and empowering. But before she could respond, Kaya moved toward a nearby wall, where a map of the Zherkoth fleet was pinned. We have to act quickly, Kaya said, her fingers tracing a line on the map. The Zherkoth are getting closer to finding us. Their forces are spread across several star systems, but this ship, the one you're on, is central to their operations. If we can destroy their power core, we cripple their entire fleet. Nova frowned. How can we destroy it? I'm not even sure how to control this power inside me yet. Kaya turned and gave her a reassuring smile. You'll learn. The energy inside you. It's not just a weapon. It's an amplifier, a way for you to tap into the latent abilities humans are capable of. You just need to focus. And when the time comes, you'll know how to use it. Nova nodded, trying to push down the surge of panic rising in her chest. The thought of facing the Zherkoth in battle, of using her new power against them, made her feel both nervous and oddly exhilarated. She was far from ready, but Kaya's confidence was contagious. Before Nova could ask more questions, the door to the room slid open, and a man stepped in. He was tall, with broad shoulders, his face partially hidden behind a rough-looking helmet. His eyes, however, were clear and sharp, scanning the room before landing on Nova. His presence was commanding but not intimidating. You're the one they've been talking about, he said, his voice deep but warm. He looked her over with a thoughtful expression. Kaya wasn't kidding. You've got something different. Nova stood a little straighter, unsure of how to respond to the stranger's gaze. Who are you? Captain Jarek, the man said with a slight nod, his voice steady. I'm the leader of this group. The Resistance doesn't have many soldiers, but what we lack in numbers, we make up for in skill. Kaya looked at Nova, her expression serious. Jarek's the one who can teach you to control your powers. He's been training for years in combat. He knows what it takes to survive in this war. Nova met Jarek's gaze, her nerves flaring. You think I can learn to control this power? I've only had it for a short time, and it's already too much to handle. Jarek crossed his arms, his demeanor calm. It's not about control. It's about trusting yourself. Trusting that the power inside you is a part of you, not something to fear. You're not the only one who's had to learn how to use new abilities. You just need to let go of your doubt. It's the only way you'll survive. Nova took a deep breath, her hands still trembling from the adrenaline rush of escaping the Zhirkov. But Jarek's words stuck with her. Maybe he was right. Maybe she was stronger than she thought. We don't have time for training, Kaya said suddenly, her voice urgent. We've learned that the Zhirkov are planning a full assault on one of the last human colonies. We need to stop them before it's too late. Nova's heart skipped a beat. What colony? Erenos, Kaya replied. It's a small colony, but it's vital to our cause. If the Zhirkov take, Jarek nodded approvingly. That's the spirit. But we'll need a plan. The Zhirkov forces are vast, and their ships are heavily guarded. We can't just charge in headfirst. Kaya stepped forward. We've got a small team of resistance fighters ready to go, but we'll need Nova to be our wild card. With her abilities, she can infiltrate their ships and sabotage their operations from the inside. Nova wasn't sure about being the wild card, but the thought of taking the fight directly to the Zhirkov was too tempting to ignore. They had hurt her, turned her into something she didn't understand. And now it was her chance to strike back, to take control of her future. I'm in, Nova said, her voice steady now. She wasn't sure what lay ahead, but she had made her choice. The resistance needed her, and she wasn't going to let them down. Jarek gave her a sharp nod. Good. Let's move out. We don't have much time. As they left the hidden room and began to prepare for the mission, Nova felt a strange sense of camaraderie with Kaya and Jarek. These people, these strangers, had risked everything to fight back against the Zhirkov. And now, Nova was part of that fight. They might not know exactly what they were up against, but together, they were ready to face it. The war was far from over, but for the first time since waking up on the alien ship, Nova felt like she was no longer a pawn in someone else's game. She was a fighter, and she was going to make sure the Zhirkov paid for what they had done. The journey to Erenos felt like it took forever. Nova sat in the small cockpit of the resistance ship, her fingers nervously tapping on the console in front of her. The low hum of the engines was the only sound, but it did nothing to calm the storm swirling inside her. This was it, the mission that could change everything. If they failed, the Zhirkov would gain an even stronger hold over the galaxy, and humanity's last hope might vanish. Nova wasn't sure she was ready for this, but she couldn't turn back now. Kaya sat beside her, working quickly on a screen, her eyes scanning data as she prepared the team for the assault. Jarek was in the back of the ship, talking to the soldiers and making sure they were ready for the chaos that was about to unfold. Every now and then, Nova would catch a glimpse of his serious expression, and the pressure to succeed weighed on her even more. How much longer? Nova asked, her voice tense as she glanced at Kaya. We're almost there, Kaya replied, her tone calm but purposeful. We'll be entering the outer atmosphere in about 20 minutes. Once we're in, we'll need to split into two teams. One will go for the Zhirkov fleet, and the other will infiltrate the colony's defense systems to ensure the Zhirkov can't reinforce their attack. Nova nodded, trying to focus. She had trained briefly with Jarek's team, but everything had happened so fast. Her new abilities were still raw, unpredictable. But Kaya had faith in her, and Jarek had promised to keep her safe. She just had to stay focused. The ship suddenly jolted, breaking her thoughts. Nova grabbed the armrests, her eyes wide. What was that? We're hitting turbulence, Kaya answered without missing a beat. Stay steady. We're getting close to Erenos. Prepare for entry. Nova took a deep breath and focused on the task ahead. They had only one chance to succeed, and she couldn't let fear control her now. Her hands gripped the console as the ship descended toward the planet. The scenery outside the viewport grew clearer: rolling hills, vast stretches of land, and the shimmering lights of the colony in the distance. Despite the beauty of the planet, Nova knew the horror that was coming. Zhirkov ships were already in orbit, their dark silhouettes blocking out the stars. A fleet of them. The Resistance's only hope was to hit them hard and fast. Kaya turned to Nova, her face serious. "You're going to be part of the strike team. We'll drop you near the colony's power grid. It's a small area, but heavily guarded. We'll need your abilities to disable their main shields." Nova nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I'll do it. I won't let you down." "You don't have to prove anything to us," Kaya said, her voice soft but firm. "We believe in you." As the ship descended closer to the surface, Nova's stomach tightened. She had to rely on her instincts, on the energy that was coursing through her veins. The power she had barely started to control. It wasn't just strength or speed. It was something else, something far more dangerous. But Nova was beginning to understand that she had to embrace it. She couldn't afford to hesitate now. The ship hit the ground with a soft thud, and the team quickly disembarked. Nova was the first to exit, the cool air of Eranos hitting her skin as rocky terrain. She squinted, looking up at the Zhirkov ships in the sky. They had a strong presence here, more than Nova had anticipated. But the Resistance wasn't backing down. Jarek gave her a quick nod, his eyes sharp. "We move fast. In and out. No mistakes." Kaya's voice came through Nova's comms. "Nova, we're counting on you. Take out those shields, and we'll give you the signal. Stay safe." "I will," Nova said, her voice steady, even though her heart was pounding in her chest. The team moved quickly, dodging cover and staying low as they approached the power grid. Nova could feel the energy building inside her, a raw power waiting to explode. She just needed to focus. The Zhirkov guards were scattered around the area, their sharp eyes scanning for any sign of the Resistance. Nova wasn't about to give them the chance to catch her off guard. Suddenly, a Zhirkov soldier turned in their direction. Nova's pulse spiked. She didn't think, just reacted. Her hands glowed with bright, crackling energy as she lifted them, sending a wave of power toward the soldier. The air sizzled with intensity as the soldier was knocked off his feet, crashing into a nearby wall. The other guards turned, shouting, but Nova was already moving, her body instinctively pulling her into action. She dashed forward, the power inside her growing stronger with each step. It was like an endless well of energy she had only begun to tap into. As she approached the control panel, she extended her hand, her fingers lighting up as she concentrated. The shields protecting the grid flickered for a moment before finally collapsing. The colony's defense grid was offline. The ground trembled beneath Nova's feet as the Zhirkov forces closed in, their weapons ready. The air was thick with tension, the battle in full swing. She could hear the distant sounds of explosions as Jarek and the other Resistance soldiers engaged the enemy. But for now, it was up to her. The power grid she had disabled was only the first step. Now she had to help them break the Zhirkov's hold on the planet. Nova's heart raced, the pulse of energy inside her crackling like an electric storm. She could feel it building, deep inside, just waiting for the right moment to explode. But as the Zhirkov forces surged forward, she knew she couldn't afford to hesitate. She had to be the one to turn the tide of this battle. She darted forward, using the terrain to her advantage, keeping low and staying out of sight. Her mind raced, calculating every move as she scanned the enemy's positions. There were more Zhirkov than she had anticipated, and they were well coordinated. But she had something they didn't, a power they couldn't begin to understand. A Zhirkov soldier appeared ahead, unaware of her approach. Nova didn't think twice. She raised her hand, and in an instant, a burst of pure energy shot out, knocking the soldier back with an explosive force. He crumpled to the ground, and Nova quickly moved on, her eyes scanning for the next target. Her comms crackled to life. "Nova, we're pushing forward on our end. Keep them distracted and take out their heavy artillery." Jarek's voice was urgent, but there was no panic. He was counting on her, just like Kaya was. Nova nodded, even though they couldn't hear her. She had already spotted the Zhirkov artillery, a massive cannon aimed at the Resistance's main stronghold. If they didn't take it out, the team wouldn't stand a chance. The cannon was heavily guarded, but that didn't matter to Nova. She could feel the power within her now, like a burning fire, ready to break free. She sprinted toward the artillery, ducking behind cover as enemy soldiers spotted her, but she was too fast. With a swift, powerful leap, Nova propelled herself into the air, landing on top of the cannon with a burst of energy that sent shockwaves through the ground. The Zhirkov soldiers fired their weapons, but Nova was already there, her hands glowing with pure light. She pressed her palm against the cannon's control panel, her energy seeping into its circuits. Sparks flew as the cannon's systems short-circuited, and with a deafening boom, the massive weapon exploded in a brilliant flash. The Zhirkov soldiers screamed in panic, scrambling to regain control, but it was too late. The cannon was destroyed, and the resistance soldiers, led by Jarek, took advantage of the chaos to push forward. "Nice work, Nova." Jarek's voice came through her comms, and she could almost hear the smile in his tone. "Now let's finish this." The remaining Zhirkov forces were retreating, but Nova knew this wasn't over yet. The real battle was still ahead, getting to the heart of the Zhirkov fleet and destroying their power source. The only way to do that was to keep pushing, to keep fighting. And Nova was ready. As she regrouped with the rest of the team, Kaya gave her a sharp nod. "You did good, but the real fight is still ahead. We're not just fighting for this planet, Nova. We're fighting for the future of humanity." Nova nodded. She understood now. This wasn't just about revenge or survival. It was about hope. The hope that humanity could stand together, fight back, and take back what was theirs. They had come this far, and they weren't going to stop until the Zhirkov were defeated. The team made their way toward the Zhirkov's main stronghold, where the final battle awaited. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and the distant echoes of explosions, but Nova's resolve only grew stronger. The power within her, the ability she had learned to control, weren't just a gift. They were a weapon, one that could save her people. As they neared the heart of the enemy base, Nova felt her connection to the energy inside her strengthen. She could feel it, pulling her forward, guiding her. This was her purpose. She had been given this power for a reason, and now it was time to use it to bring down the Zhirkov once and for all. Jarek's voice came through her comms one last time. "This is it. Let's finish this together." With a final deep breath, Nova nodded. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for humanity, for the future of her world, and for the people who had put their trust in her. And this time, she wasn't going to fail.